Okay, today's video, I race an Falcon wagon with 393 Cleveland, part rollerized C4, has a sheet metal rear end and it's got Gazzard rear suspension in it, AFCO shocks. It's street and race. And when I was doing the car, my baby under wraps, I had the whole car rewired, and since I had it rewired, I've had nothing but issues, and majority of it comes down to half of it comes down to what you're seeing here, and the other half comes down to severe lack of ground in the car. So I wanted to show you what not to do with a harness, wiring harness in a car. Everything I supplied in my car was brand new, so we're talking engine, trans, rear end. Just done mechanically, I've redone the whole car, front to back. Every gauge I supplied was brand new. Had the dash completely refurbished. I customised it for 5 gauges, plus we have another 2 gauges. Brand new fans, so 3 smell fans in the car. Basically couldn't make it any easier really. The ignition in the car is ICE 7 amp, which is quite a good system. The engine was dynoed with the exact ignition system that's in the car, and it made good horsepower and torque. But I always had a major problem starting, and once I started diagnosing it, it was discovered that the car really only had 2 grounds in it. So with my battery being in the back, it had basically a 10mm battery cable going to the bumper mount, and I could see daylight between the bolt and the spring washer. It wasn't bare metalled. Then the main ground from the battery negative went to the transmission mount and not the block. So after a period of time, that killed the coil, the ignition coil, and fried the capacitor in the module. All had to be sent back to ICE in Victoria. Michael down there was very, very helpful. Ended up with a new coil and a repaired module. But between that, I had the cables upgraded. They're still only 12.8mm, where the ICE requires 14 to 15mm diameter as a minimum, not a maximum, a minimum. So I'll be on my 3rd set of battery cables now. But the main problem is that the person that wired the car up did not read the instructions with the ICE, and once I pointed out the instructions to them, they were like, why's it got to be done like that? I don't know why you'd argue against the instructions. They're pretty specific, bold and underlined about what damage you can do to components in your car if it's not wired up properly. And that's the same for MSD, crane. It doesn't matter what brand you got. If it's not wired up properly, it's just not going to work. And you're not going to get the most performance out of your car. But even after it was, so I had the components replaced, the larger cables, main ground going to block. I didn't realise that the other parts of the ignition were not as per instructions. Even though I was told that everything in the car was checked. If it was checked, I don't know how they checked it. Maybe they had their eyes painted on. But I continue to have issues. Maybe the new improved ground, while still not good, was enough to cause some more issues with on the power side of it. So you don't have to be Einstein to work out that For every electrical connection in the car, ground must find its way back to the battery. Whether it's to the chassis, wired directly. So I got to the stage where I just got sick of band-aiding what I was looking at, and I had to pull all the ICE Loom out again when I had some more issues last year. In between these issues, I had testicular cancer, and I had a fairly slow recovery, and also moved house, so I didn't get to drive the car a lot. And some of these other things I might have checked earlier if I had realised just how bad they were. So when it came to working through these issues, my fuel pump never sounded all that healthy, so that was all rewired. That was one of the first things I found in the rear of the car. This was the fuel pump wiring for my aeromated fuel pump, and that wiring came through what I found to be a generic loom that goes from the front of the car to the back. So the amount of hours I got in just troubleshooting and trying to figure stuff out is just phenomenal. The things I found in this loom beg a belief, really. There's hardly a wire that goes from A to B and stays the same colour, isn't spliced, poorly soldered, and I wanted to give people that follow my dirty mill racing an insight into why my car's been off the road and I haven't been racing it. So this panel, this lovely little panel here, originally had 4 relays on this side, fuel pump, ignition and fans. 2 of those had a little bridge, a little wire went between them, but I've got 2 spow fans on my radiator, and they're 2800 CFM. You know, it appears to have had only one 30 amp relay for that. This top relay is the trigger wire from the starter motor, and then goes to key. But it took me a while to work all this out, because what I did do is I was looking up Google and looking up fuse blocks one night after I started pulling all this out, and what I realised was that this is a generic, quite cheap item. So that fuse block comes like that with these wires, majority of those wires sticking out. So instead of either pulling a wire out and starting from here, they just get soldered. So there's your first big mistake. So once they get soldered, they branch off everywhere. So why you would do this is really beyond me, not after the money I paid. But if you have a look, one wire goes yellow to pink, soldered again with orange, then more pink, soldered again with, wait for it, more pink. So I've got 4 wires going into one. And then that wire, so these 4 wires here go into one big soldered clump, and then that pink wire goes into another soldered clump. Eventually gets back to the fuse panel, completely different colour, and that's pretty much everyone there. So to be honest, I'm pretty disappointed. I did expect more. I expected better. I'll run through some of these other things. This post, that's a continuous duty post, and all power on this panel, so these cut-off ones, they were all onto one connector. So you've got one to a single solitary connector, and all power on there on the panel with any relay fuse was all soldered into the one connector. From that connector, the way that got power was to go back to the starter motor with this little guy. So this little guy here, that's my power lead for that whole panel that originally had 7 relays. The flasher unit, all the fuses, so all power in the car, so battery to starter, starter to panel, is this lead here. So this lead is 6 millimeters in diameter, and it's 7 foot long. So it travelled from the starter, the whole length of the motor to the front, up to the top of the motor, underneath the plenum, and then through the firewall on the passenger side to that post. There doesn't appear to be any circuit protection, so that's your starter motor trigger wire. So that goes to the starter motor. It's 7 foot long as well, when it didn't need to be. Goes to this relay, and then the power for that relay went to the panel, went to here. I've had to cut them to pull relays off when we started rewiring to try and help this car. And then from there, this lead here, this big thicker one, that goes directly to key. So between that panel, that post, 150 amp post, God knows how many cranking amps go through that goes to the back of the key. With no protection. There's no fuse. There's basically nothing. No fuse. No fusible link. Nothing between it. Where the mount was for the panel on the firewall, that was a stud into the firewall, and all these black ones are my grounds. So these were all those were done together on the one terminal, on the one ring connector, all soldered in as one big lump, and they went to the stud that poked through here. Well, the panel was never ground anywhere, so even after I had battery cables redone, this whole panel wasn't ground. There wasn't even ground to the firewall, so the fasteners, the 2 fasteners to the firewall didn't ground that panel. So no ground on the panel found its way back to the battery. To compound that, so where I've tried to first aid the car is replace the ignition module relay with 100 amp, because the power for this ignition system was never done directly to the battery. It was done from a relay here back to the post, and it's getting the power to the post from that pull thing, from that, and then started back to battery. So the power from my ignition system was severely compromised. It should have been had the power taken direct from battery as per instructions, but once again it was missed by the rewirer. God, there's so much I could talk about. This video could be an hour long if I wanted it to be. So each of the 3 relays we pulled off, so there was a row like that. I've kept them all, I've kept everything. What I've tried to do is when I pull the harness out, I've tried to keep the whole thing together and not cut anything, not make it look like any worse than what it is or any better than what it is. This was all covered up. This was all taped up and had had braid covering, so it looked neat. Quite heavy, had a lot of weight pulling off here. The panel was just too small. The panel was so busy, and I moved relays over to give it a little bit more room, but the panel was just too small to start off with. But over a period of time, 2 years, I rewired the fuel pump, ignition and the fans. So the relays for the fans are now up the front of the car. The fuel pump relays down the back of the car, and that's the new ignition relay. But the car was still a little bit hard to start. One of the guys helping me had a friend with a 16 volt ICE booster, so I brought it. It hasn't really made the car any easier to start because there is still a relay, that one. When you pull that out, you get nothing on the key. So with that lead there going from the purple lead going from your starter to the relay, and from the relay that's powered up from the panel with the poor power supply lead, and from there that goes to the key. And that's what's on key. So even though we had the ignition module wired in independently, you're still relying on the key to start the car. So we had the 100 amp relay for the ICE ignition done to a switch, a toggle switch. So I could physically switch the relay on, but you still need a key to turn the car on. And for whatever reason, it was very, very hard to start the car. It would take 4 full pumps of petrol to try and get this thing to start. Now onto some other problems. So these plugs here, those plugs there go to the back. One goes to the back of my dash. 2 of those go to the back of my dash, and the other third one goes to the back of the car. So if you look, I think there's 1 or 2 that stay the same colour. Everything else changes. So the reason that all changes is because this whole loom to the back of the car is a generic bit of loom. You just buy it like that. Then it goes into that plug, in the tail light, then over to the other tail light, and then back to the fuel sender. So just to give you an idea, my fuel sender, that wire is black. That wire goes to the white. That's my white wire. The white wire then goes nowhere. So that goes nowhere, and all that went nowhere. So I've taken that out from the rear plug. The white wire and all these this lot here, not, well, after the sender unit, they're not used for anything. They're just all in the loom, sitting there, and they all just finished abruptly here, about 1.5 foot from the tail light wiring. So none of that was being used. The number plate wiring, that's the number plate wiring. So earlier in the video when I mentioned my fuel pump, that is the wiring for my fuel pump that all came along this loom, this pre-bought loom, where hardly any colours really correspond. And that's the wiring for my aerobated fuel pump that I pulled out. So that was all into the back of that plug, and yeah, rewired it. What else? Some other bits and pieces of shit we pulled out. So as you can see, there's not a lot to like about this wiring. Some of the wires they change size when they're joined on, so different gauge wires. So this had a detrimental effect to basically how everything ran in the car. Last time I drove the car at night time, the headlights had dulled, brand new headlights, and they dulled like a brownout. And on further investigation, I found that one wasn't ground to its factory spot, wasn't bare metal. The other one wasn't bare metal, so I bare metaled them. And then I just got sick of looking at this and waiting for something bad to happen. So I pulled the whole lot out. Had to rewire the whole car again at my expense. The people that did this are not really interested. They know what they've done. The only wiring I've since had redone is the toggle switches to the middle of the car. So that wiring's been done by a different person. And we've had the fans rewired by that same bloke. That's the headlight wiring. It's like a pre-made type of kit as well. So that all goes to the front of the car. That's really about it. But when the car hasn't been ground as it should have been, ground correctly, the easiest way of explaining it is you don't have the spark that you need. You don't have the right spark to start the car. You don't have the right spark for how it was tuned on the engine dyno when it had full spark. So you end up having a car that when it does start, if and when, it would foul the plugs, and when driving it, the plugs would end up black and sooty. And then I had a funny issue when I did Street Machine Drag Challenge last year, where it basically, and this wasn't a breaking down spark, so it's still revving cleanly to 7,000 RPM. It cold it, so it looked like from the rear running extremely fat. When I crossed the finish line, I shut the car off, not realising, I didn't know. I got to the end of the track and pulled 2 spark plugs out, and they looked brand new. They didn't. You could have put them back in the box and taken them back, and they wouldn't have even questioned it. They just looked brand new, hadn't even fired, so it caused a bit of head scratching. And then the following, I didn't get another run. I changed spark plugs and put a couple back that I had taken with me that were spare, so I put them back in, thinking I might have had dud spark plugs. But the spark plugs weren't duds, there was EMI interference in the loom, so which is the next problem. So this power lead, that trigger lead, anything that goes to the coil for the ignition, that was all wrapped up tightly with my distributor loom, so it's a Hall effect distributor. And instructions are pretty specific to keep these things separate and keep the loom separate. They were done up really tightly together, which is one of the reasons the loom's pulled apart. One of the reasons the loom's pulled apart is because it was all hardwired in. So I had to literally undo 1.5 meters of loom just to pull out my ignition system completely to be sent off to be tested again. No faults were found with the system, except for one lead and added ground to my module that had one of the worst solder joins that you'll probably ever see. And that was for my ignition module. So the ignition module still wasn't ground the way it should have been to the motor. But you can see why I basically had to pull all this out of the car. There's no fixing it. You can't band-aid something like this. I watched a car show last night on Motor Trend on Demand, and they were rewiring just a utility. In the loom they had for it, every wire that went from the fuse block was it ran from the fuse block to wherever it was running. It went A to B, it stayed the same colour. It wasn't spliced, it wasn't soldered, and it just went from one connection to the next. That was, how hard is that to do? I mean, then the people that were wiring this car up, they didn't have an auto electrical business. They had a custom car shop. So to give you an idea of how bad some of this wiring is, just one wire. So that's my fuel tank sender wire to the fuel gauge. It's black. It goes to white. It goes to the plug. It stays white all the way to the front of the car. So at this stage the wire's still white. That one there. From there it goes to yellow, I think. Hang on, let me have another look. Well, as you can see, there's no white one sticking out of there. It went to yellow. So what's that one? The middle of the bottom. It's so complicated, you can't even look at something and bloody work it out. So the middle one, we'll do this together. So the middle one, that's my fuel tank sender, the white one in the middle. The middle one on here, they're brown. How complicated is that? And from brown, see, I can't even trace it easily. So I'm trying to trace these wires. Yeah, try doing this when it's in the car. Look at that. That's a 6 plug. That's 6 plugs. Look how many wires are into there. Really? Is that necessary? And not one of them is the same colour. So I have found it now, it's the other plug. So those two there, the white one is now yellow and blue. It goes yellow and blue to the back of another plug, and then it goes to yellow. So yellow, yellow and blue, white, white, white to nowhere, and then black. How confusing. Then the only thing you saw in the car was a wire with some nice bit of braided covering on it. So you're none the wiser. All this was all covered up, taped up and braided. So you're none the wiser as to what was underneath going on. So you can probably imagine I'm pretty disappointed. I live in Toowoomba. This is a local business in Toowoomba. They can't recommend it. I obviously won't be recommending them. And while I've been dealing with all this on the car, I have chronic illness, plus my cancer recovery. So every 3 months I have cancer surveillance. This is my 67 XR Falcon wagon. You might have seen on some of the drag videos if you subscribe or been following the page. So for a long period of time I just tried to keep what was in there to keep the car running, or at least be able to drive it every now and then, but the issues just became too much. Had to pull the whole lot out, and you can see why. So I've been probably lucky to avoid a fire, the car burning to the ground. So I'm having to rewire the car again. So this will be the third lot of wiring that's been in the car since it was new. It was rewired in 2017, and I've had issues with it since 2017. It's all out. It's cost me a bit over $2,000 just in what you see here, and having to redo it. I'm not counting all the hours I have trying to diagnose, fix, add other bits of wiring in, people that have helped me out, their time, my time, not being able to use a car that's fully registered and insured, not missing events. 2 of my kids have missed out driving the car when I was hoping that they would have been driving it. So that's the knock-on effect of having a very poorly wired car. The people that wired this car, they know of my health issues. They've been less than helpful. They're more concerned about what's being said and not actually fixing it. There is no fixing it. You've got to just pull it all out, start again. Feel free to comment if you think that there's a way to fix all that without pulling it all out. I'm all ears. You'll be probably the first person on earth to say, well, how do you do this? How do you reuse it? You can't. So yeah, this is my wiring nightmare. Yeah, you see these pop up from time to time, and you hope you're not one person that's affected by it, but unfortunately I am, and I've got to wear it. And the people involved don't care. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. try and keep it constructive. I haven't mentioned anything about what I'd like to do that I'd like to avoid it, so don't go and mention anything like that. This is more of a, well, for anyone buying a car, this is more of an instructional video for what not to do. I can show you what not to do, and yeah, if you've got a high horsepower engine and it relies on aftermarket ignition, look at the instructions, make sure it gets wired in as per instructions, and sometimes don't leave it up to others. That's probably my biggest mistake, is being naive and letting others do the work on my poor car. Because to do this right the first time isn't all that hard. And you'd end up with a happy customer and they never have to come back. Thanks for watching.